Before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the Dharawal people as well and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm a proud Aranda woman. I was born in Canberra, and have been living in Melbourne for 24 years. I'll just go to this next one before I actually go through the rest of the stuff. But I wanted to put this up just for the international people. So when we're saying Aranda people, or Arente as it seems to be said by white fellas at every single forum I ever go to, the blue blob right smack bang in the middle of the country, they're my traditional lands. And for the mob around here, so smack bang, middle of the country, red hot desert country. Right now it's probably averaging about 43 degrees during the day. For the mob here, I'm always asked what Liddle I am, because they know that we are a gigantic family, and my dad was one of 11 kids. My grandfather was one of, I think, something like 8 or 9. But yeah, we're pretty much, our links are Aranda, and Aranda. I got 3 Aranda great grandparents, and the Liddle side of the family is through Harold Liddle. My grandmother's side of the family is the Perkinses, which is another Aranda link. So we're related to half the desert through marriage and through extended family, but my lot are very much covering that blue blob in the middle. Okay, a bit back. I'm a unionist. I know that I'm not a middle-aged white bloke wearing fluoro, but which is what people sort of envisage when they think of trade unionist in this day and age. The fact of the matter is, I'll throw it out. Does anyone know what the biggest union in Australia is right now?
CMFU?
No.
Manufacturing workers?
No.
NUA? Teachers?
Nurses and midwives. One industry. Mainly women, university educated. So that's the biggest union right now in Australia. And unions at this point in time are mainly university educated women are the biggest members of unions, not blokes in fluoro, not white blokes in fluoro. My blog is Rantings of an Aboriginal Feminist, and that other part was already mentioned. Here's my mum and dad. So dad's there on the left in the middle, probably about 71, 72 that was taken. I don't know about the headband. That's my mum. I'm just doing this to give a bit of personal background and also because I was inspired, and I like to put some family photos up. My mum's background's white Australian. She is a family working class Clifton Hillborn Collingwood supporters family. So that's where my mum's from. So I'm Collingwood by birth, but I don't really care about football. That's them now. And the next generation, this was me on Saturday night, and I dragged my little nephew along to a gig that I was at. So that's him sitting there looking thoroughly bored, listening to his auntie read out a poem by Oodgeroo Nanukul called No More Boomerangs. So he was very good. He only interrupted me once. But yeah. Okay, so to actually talk about the theme, how did I discover social media? I didn't discover the internet until I went to university. In fact, I handwrote all of my Year 12 papers. I did Year 12 in '96 and we didn't have a computer at home, so everything was handwritten. My first taste of the internet was going to university, using the computers there. Bit of Netscape Navigator. I think we had things like ICQ and MRIC as well. Yeah, everyone's like, oh my goodness, that was a long time ago. But that's how we talked back then. That was social media back then. That was, we had these little flowers which glowed. And I was always set to invisible so that I didn't have to talk to certain people. But that was the first sort of link in, and using, Netscape Navigator, which was the only search engine I think that, took about 10 years to load up. But that's the rudimentary online discussions. What happened next? As was mentioned, I am a theatre and drama graduate. I started off as a science student and a geology major, so how I ended up with a first class honours in theatre and drama is anyone's guess. I was at uni for a very long time. But yeah, while I was in drama and while I was doing my honours year, and I think also my third year as well, that was about the time when reality TV started becoming a huge thing in Australia with Big Brother. And I was fascinated with that god-awful show. So I'd watch it, and as a drama student, I'd be dissecting it because we were told it was reality TV, but the way that it was set up was that the people that they put in the house were very much put in the house for purposes. Then the editors would come along. We were talking last night, over a few drinks about how Big Brother has script writers, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. So, they put people in the house who fitted certain personality categories. They then edited those people in order to show them in certain ways. And I couldn't drag myself away from it. And when I discovered that Big Brother had online forums, which I could go and argue with other people on, that's what I did. So my first foray into online discussions and interactions was Big Brother forums, and that led to other sort of stuff. So I'm really embarrassed to admit that, but that was the starting point. Because of that early sort of thing, because that was very much the foruming on those sorts of platforms was very much the first interactive sort of online as opposed to those individual programs. From that and from eventually finishing uni and moving into working in student support at Victorian College of the Arts and then at University of Melbourne for 8.5 years all up, I did that. By the time I started working in student support, emails were so 90s. And the students were starting to move into things like MySpace and I think it was only MySpace back then. MySpace eventually became just for the emos and everyone moved over. But it was kind of, to interact with the students, I had to start utilising the channels that they were using because they weren't reading emails. So I picked up MySpace and started using that as a communication tool and created pages around our Indigenous support unit and those sorts of things. When Facebook became the new tool, I was on Facebook like mere months after I think it was created, and the pages for the various Indigenous centres that I've worked for over the years were formed pretty much straight away as well. For the dual purpose, not only of communicating with students, but also knowing that nearly every single black fella out there is on Facebook. So it was an easy way to actually connect the communities and get them interested in the centre and how it was supporting people from all over the country. It's kind of, I guess too, things like Facebook were seen as more personal than just having a website, so that you could have that real-time communication in order to get people engaged. I started my first blog probably similar sort of time, about 2007. It was just a personal blog called The Battleground. It's still there, it's doing nothing. I deleted a heap of stuff from there. I think there's a post about my car accident, there's a post about how to make vegan pancakes, because occasionally I try cooking and then I learn. But yeah, it's still out there. It used to be much bigger. It's not worth checking out. But I've always written from a very young age, whether it was all stories or poems. My teenage years were a whole heap of really emotional poetry. So channeling that and the ability to actually use writing as therapy. So creating something in a space when you're processing it, so that it exists out there and you're not necessarily holding it in here, was something that I got onto very, very, at a very young age, and found blogging was an excellent way of channeling that. Blogging started in personal. Rantings of an Aboriginal feminist came along later. But of course, it came out of activism. So my sole purpose with creating rantings was to actually create a space that was political, that was about Aboriginal women's political discussion, and that was from a fairly radical left perspective. And that was deliberate, because what I was seeing in the media, I refer to white dudes a lot, because they're, the media is pretty much mainstream privileged white dudes control a fair chunk of it. So the sorts of opinions that are out there in the mainstream media reflect those values. The sorts of Aboriginal people that have mainly been engaged in the mainstream media are the ones that are least threatening to those values most of the time. So for me, blogging was upsetting that balance. This was a space that I could own as someone who's an identifiable sort of the left, hard left, whatever else, Aboriginal feminist sort of voice. I could control it. I could write whatever the hell I wanted on it. I started it came out of activism on Facebook. There was a group of us who were working a lot around the misappropriation of Aboriginal imagery and profiles online. So we got active along that and tried to stop people from creating fan pages about our family members or our cultural groups or whatever else. And that created a network that still kind of exists in an ad hoc sort of way today. And to older women, when I sort of raised the idea I want to start Aboriginal feminist discussions, actually actively encouraged me to do so. So they said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I started up a blog. The title of it is a joke. Rantings of an Aboriginal Feminist is about appropriating everything that we're accused of doing once we take a stand. So that angry black woman sort of thing. I just thought it was funny. But yeah, I expected, I guess, that the only people who would read it would be Aboriginal women, feminists who had an interest in Aboriginal feminism, and also Aboriginal men who were working as allies, and there are so many of them. And a lot of my shares actually come from Aboriginal men. What I wasn't expecting is that 6 weeks after I started it, one of the articles that I'd written on my blog would be picked up for publication by Fairfax. So it took me 6 weeks from starting the blog to actually being published. And that doesn't happen. So I'm sort of, when I was talking creating havoc, I'm also the cautionary tale. What you put out there that you think no one will read, isn't it? So, and that was just an article, me sort of critiquing Aboriginal beauty pageants, from the idea of claiming your own identity as Aboriginal women versus the concept of beauty and how that frames women in general. And yeah, it grabbed someone's attention. And since then, I've been freelance writing, ever since. I've already covered all this just by rambling, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so from the first piece being published 6 weeks after I started it, I then went from a freelance writer to a public speaker almost as quickly. So it was mere weeks after that. I was on the radio, I got called up to be on TV. It was crazy. It was, I guess one of the best things that came out of it, my purpose was never to be the voice for Aboriginal feminism. My purpose was purely to wedge in and create a space for a different voice, in the hope that through me being who I am, there'd be an opportunity for discussion, debate. If people wanted to start another blog and absolutely challenge everything I wrote, I was cool with that, because that was about furthering Indigenous discussions in the public realm. And one thing I saw was that my work inspired other people's who inspired other people's. I came along at the time when Aboriginal blogs started exploding, and they were networked by people like these two in some sort of way, through deadly bloggers or through the calling of them through rotating accounts like Indigenous X. So we all came along at reasonably the same time. Yeah, my other thing was, you know, once I did end up being a freelancer, I was hoping that it would lead to the furthering of Indigenous discussions that we own in the mainstream media, and that's starting to happen more and more. And it's starting to happen less and less from the traditional sort of conservative Aboriginal voices, which were considered less threatening. So we're seeing more diverse opinion. We've got a hell of a long way to go. But yeah. I developed further interfaces, so it was mentioned I have a Facebook page. I've learned how to use Twitter. I hate Twitter, but it's essential for anyone working in the media, I've discovered, because they're all the journos, all the publications are on it. I got tweeted by Q&A the other night, and that was disturbing. And Black Feminist Round has now been going on for 3.5 years, and the average hits that I get on just a piece that I post up there is 2,000. Little, yeah, per piece. My biggest one is over 10, and that was actually, just to tell you what that was actually a dissection. That was an argument piece. I'd been challenged about how Aboriginal people use the word black. And you know, the fact that we positively identify as black no matter how dark or fair-skinned we are, because it's about being, you know, it's about being proud in your identity and doing those links back. That doesn't necessarily translate in the dialogues from African American perspectives, from African Australian perspectives. You know, other black people don't necessarily identify with, you know, that range that we have. So that was an argument. I actually got told off by another black person of a different background about how I'd used black, and I refuted that. And that's my biggest read piece ever. Yeah, and that was about 13,000 or something ridiculous like that. So 2,000 on that is an average for what goes on. And I've done an experiment. I actually posted up an article just before when I was sitting there. We'll see how many hits that gets by the end of the conference. There it is. Yep. Anyone wants to look at? It's really, it's a blogger. It's a free one. It's still low rent space, kind of on purpose, because I don't know. I still like being the anti-media. Yeah, and I've had to develop it. I've had to say who I am. I've had to post links to my own articles up. It's developed. How am I doing for time? I'm okay? Okay, so just really quickly, it is an activist space. I have used it for activism. A couple of the things that I've actually run from Black Feminist Round here, you can see the link up there, Counting Dead Aboriginal Women 2015. Unfortunately, that's a horrible thing to run, but it started as a response to sites like Destroy the Joint, like Real for Women, who had started tallying female victims of violence against women, and they were doing it just as a race neutral, disability neutral, sexual orientation neutral sort of space. Destroy the Joint were focusing on all women who are victims of violence against women, including women who are murdered by other women, because they were arguing lateral violence. Real for Women, on the other hand, a radical feminist space, so they were just focusing on female victims of male violence. But by April, I'd noticed the incredibly high representation of Aboriginal women in both those lists. As we stand right now, the Destroy the Joint list, we're making up nearly 20% of that list. The Real for Women one's about 14%, so we're either representing at a rate 5 to 7 times what a population parity rate would be. So that's a bit of activism that's come out of that. Because of that, I have spoken about it on radio several times, keynote addresses on the issues of violence. I've been on TV, which I always hate being on TV, but I've ended up there now. But yeah, so that's one bit of activism, and that's an ongoing one. And that's related directly to gendered discussions of violence against Aboriginal women. My issue with that was that not only is the dialogue around violence always, it always seems to be framed by politicians and the mainstream media, but they'll blame everything from alcohol to no jobs to remoteness to drugs, whatever they can, and they use those things that they're blaming as a way of removing rights, not just from Aboriginal women, but from Aboriginal men. So things like the intervention were very much off the back of we need to protect the women. Closure of communities is being argued the same way right now. So trying to reframe that discussion is a bit of activism that I've been working on the blog. Via my blog, I fundraised $2,800 for ovarian cancer research by wearing dresses for the entire month of October once. That was awful. And the Uluru Bark petition. So I started a petition against the Uluru Bark petition. And that was played off my blog, was with is it change.org? One of those petition sites, I can't even remember off the top of my head. But yeah, I was incredibly offended by the, does everyone know what the Uluru Bark petition is? Some of you won't. Okay, so a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people took a bark petition to Parliament House, Federal Parliament, and bark petitions have particular sort of significance in Aboriginal communities. So, you know, they've been related to treaties, they've been related to land rights. I'm stumbling over my words because I'm on a lot of painkillers right now. But they tabled it, and they were arguing that they supported the government's stance against marriage equality on the basis of this is not in line with traditional Aboriginal beliefs on marriage, which is between man and woman. And the worst part about that was, as part of their campaign, they named 44 Aboriginal clans across the entire country and said, we, the people of these nations, state that this is against our beliefs. And I'm just sort of, yeah, look, if traditional marriage is between man and woman, then how do you explain 3 generations ago when we had man and 3 women, you know, that I'm descendant from? So that was, I said they had no right. I started up a petition against the Uluru Bark petition from a feminist perspective. That took off. I got a thank you very much for your petition from one federal politician thus far, but I might resend it to them. They changed their cabinet too. Really, really quickly, just to sort of round it off. So I've used social media. I'm not so much talking directly as Indigenous, I'm talking around. So I'm talking my feminist and my union, because I can't actually avoid being Indigenous anytime and they all plug in. But I've also used social media and online communications extensively in union organising. That's our new logo there. I came up with the concept of it. It got endorsed at our National Council this year. Someone turns around to me and goes, wow, 3 number 7 boomerangs, that's a fighting one, isn't it? Which is pretty appropriate for a union sort of caucus, I think. So the significance of those ones, we've pretty much got versions of these boomerangs, not in the same shape, but similar sort of ideas all around the country. They're killer boomerangs or fighting ones, or in other areas, they're clubs, you know. It's kind of that whole sort of, warring and Yeah. So we thought we'd just rock up and chuck a few of those on the bargaining table when we're negotiating Indigenous employment targets and see what the other side do. But I guess it was interesting trying to translate this into another sort of social justice movement around workers' rights and around engagement of Indigenous people who are organised in this sort of way. To revisit points quickly which are relevant, my online presence had already been established due to previous interface with students. I noticed through that networking that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff in universities had also embraced social media as a way of not only connecting with the student body, but were using blogging and self-publishing in order to get their works out there in broader sort of ways that wasn't just within academic journals or whatever else. Public intellectuals is probably the best way to put it. Because I'd used social media for student organising, the first thing I did was pretty much start the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social media accounts within the NTU when I started work there 5 years ago, and I did so without even asking the union. So I just, claimed sovereignty and claimed some space. The NTU itself developed social media policies later down the track as a response to the growing social media presence. So the accounts that I created led to an increased national one. We started seeing accounts spring up from branches and divisions. And because they'd seen that this was a tool that they had to start actually engaging with, they started developing policies around it. Some tactics. I've got the Three Stooges here, but that's Terry Mason. Terry Mason's a chair of our Indigenous Policy Committee. John Graham is a national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander councillor. He lives in Queensland. Phil Myru is Torres Strait Island man. He's also a division organiser for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members in Queensland as well. I think they were hanging around for a lecture there. The tactics for online engagement with the union movement is slightly different. So one thing that I've drawn on is the cult of personalities, and I'm borrowing from Maoism here. But many members and staff maintained their own activist presence or academic presence on social media, and therefore there was an opportunity to cross-promote and network and draw out the works that various people were already doing in this space. So the people who were activists could actually be actively highlighted like that. And people knew who they could tap into to do that. So my role was networking that. Using the cross-modal communications, that was what I learnt through personal. So we've got the Facebook and Twitter. I do online versions of circulars. We still use email. We follow that up with print publications. So we try and hit all the communication levels possible and extend the relevance. So one of the things that I've always been huge on is that, single issue movements rarely go anywhere. They just get locked in and that's about it. So the need for particularly the union movement, but even, you see the arguments around the feminist movement where feminism's for white women or doesn't do disability and all that sort of stuff. The need for that intersectional engagement, and I hate the word intersectionality, but I'm always labelled with it. There was a need for the union movement to do that. So getting involved in broader social justice movements that were relevant to our members, that engaged them in ways that were more personal. We did need to engage them too, because we're union members at twice the rate of what the mainstream are, which makes sense because we're more likely to have issues in universities, I think. Some of the campaigns that I've fostered through that sort of stuff, myself and other people. So raising the issue of racism, discrimination, cultural respect and lateral violence on campus through member surveys, through articles, through just online discussions. Raising awareness of mainstreaming agendas in universities. So more and more we're seeing Indigenous programs, student services, all of that absorbed into mainstream departments, and what was autonomous spaces that were fought for in the 80s are slowly dissolving. And this is an issue, and it flies very much in the face of the actual recommendations that the universities are using to justify it. The Berendt Review into Indigenous higher education, whilst talking about a presence across the university, also said the strengthening of the centres. So yeah, universities are mainstreaming us. We have done work on alternate stances to constitutional recognition. We have done related stances and articles, and that a lot of our members have been involved in papers around self-determination, sovereignty treaty. They backed up my petition against the Uluru-Bart petition, so I was allowed to cross-promote that between Black Feminist Ranter and the union movement, which was pretty ace because we had a policy in support of marriage equality within the NTU and the push for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employment targets. I've got to race through this part, don't I? Okay, so the outcomes from the example that has happened within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander membership, the NTU looked at what we were doing, were influenced at what we were doing, increased their own social media presence due to what it was that was happening in our space, because they saw that it was the way that they need to start engaging. Yeah, it is also, the NTU has also been forced to actually be more relevant to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and has been, you know, actively promoting things like the Stop the Forced Closures campaign. Was an act, I can't remember what other ones, these are the painkillers. I've twice personally acted as the National Social Media Coordinator for the National Tertiary Education Union, so I've gone mainstream to fill gaps and to build up the following within it. So my skills have been drawn on. And the NTU has developed has further developed our reputation for being a dissenter. So we're an issue union and we often fly in the face of the broader ACTU, and it's a very interesting space because we look after academics and they're people who debate and who challenge and critically think. So a lot of our policy is around that. And it means that we end up being a dissenter union. We're getting more of a reputation for that. I'm really proud. Okay, just to finish up, here's some links. So I put Rantings of an Aboriginal Feminist. I've also put my Facebook page up there directly underneath it. If anyone wants to look, it's nowhere near as active a space, but it's there. But the NTU Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Caucus Facebook page. We've got the website, and then the Twit spaces are at Utopiana and at NTU Indigenous. I think that's it. Yeah.
Sure. I just caught a little bit when you said you didn't like the term intersectional. Oh God. Application. Right. Yeah. So, what are your opinions on the term?
It's a term that I use for convenience. More than anything, I think that, obviously I think that intersectional is exceptionally important and a lot more of it needs to happen. The reason I don't like it is, I guess, because that was just how I was branded by mainstream people. So for me, I don't know anything different from being an activist who is Aboriginal, feminist, and from a working class background.
So it's about being defined from the outside.
It's about an outside looking in sort of thing. These are my politics, this is who I am, and intersectional is them defining me because I'm dealing with more than one interphase of oppression as I go about it. I guess we don't look at, the other problem with intersectionality is we don't look at the intersectionality of privilege. So, you know, that sort of someone actually analysing their intersections of privilege. You don't see them labelled as an intersectional privileged sort of person. You just see them as Andrew fucking Bowles or something like that. But yeah, it doesn't work in the other sort of way. So I find it a term that I've been labelled with. I think it's an exceptionally important thing. I think that, you know, to be relevant for me to be for me to actually be interesting to other Aboriginal women, I need to have that dialogue. But I'm coming from a feminist perspective. So there's always that sort of cross. But yeah, it's a label that's been imposed by a mainstream that I only use for convenience. Like Aboriginal, to be honest, because I'm an Aranda woman, but that's a label that's been imposed that I use for convenience and also to show my solidarity with the other, you know, First Nations people in the room. Yeah. Right. And also, yeah.
When you were talking about your statistics, like 2,000 is your average hit, do you find that you get a lot of hits well after the article has been written? Do you sort of have that each post has the immediate hits and then over time you have these pop-ups or of interest again?
Yeah. Oh God, I don't know if I should say what I'm going to say right now. One of the biggest search terms on my website is best price. One of the other ones is constitutional recognition, and so those sorts of things people will Google those terms, find that I've written stuff, find the article, share it all of a sudden several years after I've written it, and that'll lead to another boost. One of the other really weird things that I had, I was speaking to you two both, but just for everyone else, one of the weirdest things, I of course identify as fairly radical, hard left, but where I sit within that to me has never been relevant because I'm driven by Indigenous rights and by women's rights. I thought that maybe some lefties will read it, and I thought probably because I'm involved in the union movement, it might be more the socialists, so the various factions of that. It was actually picked up hugely by the anarchist groups, the sorts of writings that I was writing, and they seemed to love it for some reason. So a couple of my articles got put on anarchist sites across the world, and there's one post where I bagged out, I think it was Reef and Beef Restaurant, the signs for that over in Denmark. Someone sent me one as they'd gone through the airport and said, have a look at this. And so I wrote on it. And that's still being shared around anarchist sites across the world. And I wrote that 2.5 years ago, I think. So I'm still getting spikes on that, and it's still being driven along. So it's really weird how it plays out. The other biggest feeder to my blog that actually gets people back is every single time I write an article for the mainstream media, people tend to find my blog through that. So it'll lead them to all sorts of weird places.
Thanks for your presentation, Celeste. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you walk that line between the mainstream media and your voice and what you have to say, and if you have any sort of warnings or cautions or strategies.
Oh, huge amounts of them. Like, I tripped up and fell into the mainstream media is kind of how I describe it. I never set out intending that I'd become freelance opinion. The biggest issues that I have are the pigeonholing of opinions. So on my blog, it's still a free space where I can write whatever the hell I want. I think I wrote an article about some sexist stuff that had been written about Kim Kardashian. I don't even know who she is. But the ability to write that sort of article exists only within my blog. With the mainstream media, it'll be Celeste speaks uniquely on this perspective, so we need to get her to talk about this all the time. It'll always be things that are framed around Indigenous, so you end up getting stuck, and it's hard to get out of. It's hard to get out of what other people see you as, and what sort of views that you've become known for. So that'd be the one thing. I think that I've maintained my blog. I could probably at this point in time shut down my blog and just continue writing in the media. I've been offered several columns now, and I reject them because I'm, still a hardcore full-time working unionist and I like freedom. Yeah. But it's kind of, I guess, that's why I have kept my blog going, because I've still got that freedom to write about whatever I want, whenever I like, in a way that I don't with the mainstream media, because despite the fact that I am an anomaly and I fly in the face of what they usually got with Indigenous opinion before, there's still very much this niche that you can be seen as, and that's frustrating. So yeah, own your own space and continue it for your own sanity, it'd be what I'd say.
All right, thank you, Celeste.
Yeah.